And we're back. This is, I looked up the address of this place. It's still there. You look at it on Google Maps. It's 1047 East, 132nd South in Draper, Utah. So when you do 132nd, you do 13200. So still there. And like I said, they had everything we needed for interiors, exteriors. Very little done at our studio on this particular episode. Well, now in this moment here, you get to know a little bit more about Nathaniel's sympathy towards the character Kyle, and he doesn't want Kyle to be hauled in by the police. And Kyle's going to explain his story a little bit better to Russell at this point. What it turns into is a story about this company, Tyler Industries, in the story. They deal with hazardous waste, and they've been dumping it somewhere way, outside of town, but it happens to get into the drinking water of the place where Kyle lives. And so what he's trying to say is that because of the negligence of Tyler Industries, they killed my wife, and other people are having health problems as well. So this becomes an episode with an environmentalist kind of storyline, but also we explore the fact that Russell Greene, having been in Vietnam, is somewhat sympathetic when he hears about it because of Agent Orange and some of the dangerous chemicals that some of his buddies were exposed to in Vietnam, and nobody quite was telling a straight story on what sorts of symptoms his buddies were getting because of that exposure. So that's what we'll explore in this episode, along with the idea of just having this very colorful 100-year-old character with all kinds of, sounds like tall tales about what she's been doing over the last 100 years with her life. But it turns out that many of these stories appear to be true because she has pictures and autographs and whatever to kind of back up these stories. But you can pick up just about any historical significant character in the real history of the 20th century, and Auntie Mooster probably had some sort of interaction with that. So they had a little fun with that. Now, Cloris Leachman actually won an Emmy Award for playing this character. Not on this episode. It was the following year. This was the fifth episode that we did in season 1 of Promised Land. The fifth episode of the following season was also a Mooster episode, and Cloris Leachman played the role again, and actually won an Emmy Award for a guest spot on a series. So that's cool. Emmy Award-winning show, Promised Land. Now, this cornfield really was just to the north of the house where we shot all the other stuff, and it just happened to be harvest time, mid-September when we were shooting this. And on this particular day, as I recall, as we were driving from one location to another, I was listening to the radio, and it was the Rush Limbaugh radio program. Now, at that particular day, it wasn't Rush Limbaugh himself hosting the show. It was a fill-in guest host known as Michael Medved. Michael Medved, accomplished movie critic, and now has his own talk radio show. But on this particular day, he was filling in, and he happened to talk about, hey, this upcoming premiere of a Touched by an Angel spinoff. I heard him talk about it on this national radio show, and he was telling people that it was a spinoff of Touched by an Angel with this patriotic character, Russell Greene, who was going to be traveling around the country, trying to help people along the way and get to know America. So Michael Medved himself characterized the show as touched by a patriot, and was recommending to all the listeners that they should check it out that upcoming Sunday night. So this is what I heard, this national promotion we were getting for the show before we'd even aired our first episode on the particular day when we shot this cornfield scene. So that was happening in real life. So in this scene, Russell Greene is telling him, yeah, the cops came and they hauled Kyle off, but he told me this disturbing story about exposure to dangerous chemicals and weird diseases, cancers going around, and so he's saying, this really concerns me. And Mooster says, well, this company's been good to this town, and these stories can't be true, and everything sounds fine. And Russell says, I don't know, I've heard that line before. In the previous scene, Mooster casually mentioned that they had a hot air balloon, and so the kids got all excited about it, and they wanted to go check it out. So they went and found it in the barn. And like I told you, there really was this barn was at the real location. They dressed it up a little bit to look a little bit like it had been neglected, and they put fake cobwebs all around it and stuff and dressed it up. But that was the real barn there in Draper. And this is a set which was built for this episode. So we're back at our soundstage for this, police station, sheriff's office, jail interview scene where Russell has decided he wants to have a little conversation with Kyle and find out a little bit more about these allegations of the dangerous chemicals that people have been exposed to. Now, I mentioned that I was not familiar with David's prior work with the Police Academy movies and whatever, but I did get that he was primarily known for his comedic acting work prior to this. So, I guess when you have comedic actors, generally speaking, they're also very good dramatic actors. And, a very good dramatic actor doesn't necessarily jump over and do comedy well, but comedy actors tend to really do great with drama. So this is my first time seeing him, and I think he did a great job with this very dramatic role. Now, just a little more than 2 years later, he was on a Touched by an Angel episode. Also, a brief but dramatic role on that episode. In that episode of Touched by an Angel, his character dies from a heart attack while jogging, which is kind of sad because in real life, just a couple of years after he did that Touched by an Angel episode, this actor, David Graff, himself actually died from a heart attack. He was 50 years old, so that's a little sad, but he left behind a lot of work that people really enjoyed. So that's good, and at least we got a chance to work with him as well. So nice to have that interaction. Okay, so hot air balloon. Now they found somebody who had a real hot air balloon, and they used the basket here, and they dressed it up a little bit to look like it had been in a state of disrepair and neglect. Like I said, fake cobwebs all over it here, and Tom Amanda's looking like he's getting the gas lines all fixed up and stuff. But we really had, working hot air balloon that some guys who really ran the thing came and helped us set it up. So what we'll see a little bit later in the episode is they're actually going to fly in this thing. And that is the primary reason why they hired a helicopter to do some aerial work in the episode. Like I said, they got a couple of extra shots with the helicopter as long as they were at it, or that they used earlier in the episode. So they shot all of that in one day, or in just probably a couple of hours on the same day. But you'll see coming up here some aerial shots when they will actually, spoiler alert, they will actually fly in this balloon. I mentioned that we had a premiere party when this episode aired. Normally, we wouldn't have had a party of that sort. When you start working on a show, whether it's a television show or a feature film, you just got to get to work. And in this case, we'd been working together for a couple of months by the time the season premiere, or in this case, the series premiere was on. It is, however, typical that you would have a wrap party after something is completely done. Whether it's a TV series like this, we'd have a wrap party at the end of every season, or if it's a feature film, you'd have a wrap party at the end of the whole show. And again, those are nice because when you're working on the show, you're generally working, 12-hour days, maybe longer by the time, and that's just when you're actually there working. So whatever commute time you have going to work and going home, that's a lot of time away from home. So it's nice to be able to have your spouse or your kids or whoever you can invite to the wrap party. Usually it's just a date. It's not the whole family, but it's nice to have your significant other to be able to come with you and see some of the people you've been spending so much time with, and by this time you've become friends and all that sort of thing. So we did have on the Promised Land show and also on the Touched by an Angel program, we would typically have a Christmas party because we'd have a little brief Christmas break and we'd then work after that. So that marked it was past the halfway point of production, but it was nice to have a Christmas party, and we always had some really nice events when we had our Christmas parties and our wrap parties on these shows. So but in this case, we did have a premiere party. It was just kind of special. I think that there had been an interest in this program because it was geared more towards a patriotic kind of a motivation, more so than Touched by an Angel was kind of a religious motivation for these people out there doing good. So there were some certain people in politics that had become interested in the show. I think they had some sort of premiere screening for in Washington, D.C. for office holders and things like that. And so I'm not privy to a lot of that stuff, but some of the people that worked on the show primarily in Los Angeles doing the post-production work and stuff, they were a little more involved in some of these other high-profile events to launch the show. It wasn't very typical that we would ever get a chance to really watch the show together as a crew. And so I sort of missed that. In fact, during this first season of the series, the show was on Tuesday nights at, 7 o'clock locally in our mountain time zone. So we wouldn't necessarily be finished working our typical work day on a Tuesday so that we could all go home and watch the show. So a lot of people setting their VCRs. This is just barely before, TiVo, and certainly before a lot of things streamed on the internet. So if you worked on this show, a crew member, you'd have to set your VCR to record it. And that's why I have this recording right here that you're watching now, because I've just recorded this on my own VHS tape. But now there was one program that I worked on, Everwood, later, where they would do this really nice thing. That program aired on Monday nights. And so during our lunch break as a crew, we had a caterer, so we'd all have lunch together. On Mondays, when a new episode was ready to air, they'd set up multiple TVs in our lunchroom, and we'd all sit and watch that episode, while we were eating lunch. And that was the only way we could see, finished episodes together. None of us on the normal crew ever got a chance to see a completed episode, until it was ready for the whole world to see. And so that was neat. That was one of the things I liked about the Everwood show. Not that it was necessarily torture working on the Promised Land show, but I just thought it was, somewhat significant that typically you're just really busy when you're working on a production and you don't have time to carve out to go home and watch TV. During our second season and third season of Promised Land, the show moved to Thursday nights, and so being later in the week for the working crew, our days typically ran later anyway. So there was very little chance, most Thursdays, that we'd be off work by 7 o'clock, so we could all go home and watch Promised Land. All right, there were some moments that I was talking when they showed some sort of flashbacks as Russell Greene is contemplating the idea that there's there's some sort of chemical exposure that's poisoning the people in this area. He's thinking back about Vietnam. So they had some flashback moments there where maybe it looked like guys going into an area that was full of Agent Orange. And rather than shoot something, with orange smoke going through, I think they just used regular what we use for movie smoke. And it's the kind of thing that you might go down to Guitar Center and buy a fog machine for your rock band or something. They use that sort of stuff, and then they just did sort of a black and white with an orange tint because it's Russell's flashback. And then a moment ago you saw him looking at what supposedly was maybe one of his wounded friends who was suffering in the hospital because of exposure to chemical weapons. So those were done separately from the main shooting of the rest of the episode. This is a very busy episode for us to shoot. It just seemed like that very first day, since we started late in the day, we were a little bit under the gun for the entire episode, it seemed. In fact, there's a moment coming up where they have the balloon ride, where a few shots of that were actually done the day. I think it was like the day after we were supposed to have wrapped the show. So we actually spent a little portion of an extra day doing a little bit before we. And then started the next episode later that day. Typically, the way we do these shows, you would not have any significant crossover. I mean, when an episode was pretty self-contained. You start on day 1, and we had an 8-day schedule. So by the end of day 8, everything for that episode was done. And you typically weren't working on the next episode until you were done. It might seem more efficient to say, well, if you've got a whole bunch of scenes in the Airstream trailer from various episodes, why don't you do them all at once? And yeah, I guess that makes sense, but because so many episodes were in production, I don't think they could have really planned it that way so that they could have broken it up quite that well in advance. Okay, so here is the actual hot air balloon that they are actually starting to inflate back there behind the barn at the actual location down there in Draper. I remember when we shot this, if you can imagine dozens of crew members hanging around, outside the frame here. And I was one of the folks that was helping the guy who actually ran this balloon in real life to kind of unroll it, and he and another guy that was with him. Oh, and here's our shot. I'm in that shot. And no, I'm not in that shot. So that wide shot you saw, we shot that a few days after the principal photography of this episode, and that's the day we had the aerial photography, the helicopter working with us. But you might have correctly guessed that a lot of the other stuff you're seeing here with the close-ups of the actors in the balloon basket was faked. We actually put the basket on a platform in a parking lot near the Triad Center for some of these close-ups, and just had the camera kind of wobbling around, and intercut that with some of these aerial shots looking down at the landscape as they're talking about the area where this supposed chemical dumping has taken place. But that very first shot you saw of the balloon up in the air, that wide shot, I was one of the photo doubles who was actually riding in the balloon for that shot.